And welcome to this week's Check-In with the Doctor. I am Chris White, your host, and I'm actually really excited for this week's guest. He's I'm going to say a young man or young gentleman who I had the pleasure of meeting not too long ago, named Luke Winsor, and he's a sales engineer manager with HighSpot, and he does a number of other things too. Luke, so good to see you. Welcome. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Chris, and I'm just pumped to be here. Thanks so much for having me on, and I'm excited to chat with you for an hour or so.
Awesome. Well, I'm particularly delighted to have you, Luke, and you and I were just chatting about your age a moment ago, which I won't disclose in respect to your privacy. But I just discovered that Luke is only, a little bit older than my oldest son. So I feel like I'm in this session, I have the opportunity to sort of reach to the next generation. So that's a thrill for me. Luke, in case anybody who might be listening doesn't know who you are, do you mind just taking a minute and introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in my late 20s. I'm from Seattle, Washington, and I work for a company called HighSpot. So we are a sales enablement company. I've been at HighSpot for almost 4 years now, which is by HighSpot standards a lot of tenure because we are one of those hypergrowth startup, the usual deal. Like you said, I'm a manager of sales engineers at HighSpot, and so I kind of split my time at work between individual contributor type work and manager work. I went to Washington State University. I'm also go Cougs, and I'm also a podcast host. So I started my own podcast a few months ago called 20s and Broke that we'll probably talk about a little bit later on in the episode.
So, but by the way, so I'm a Washington Redskins fan, and one of the more famous quarterbacks to come out of Washington State, I think, was Mark Rypien. That's probably way before your time. But yes, I'm a big Mark Rypien fan. So, really, Luke, that's why you and I connected. I mean, first of all, I have a background in sales enablement, and in fact, I saw HighSpot, I think 3 or 4 years ago when I was in the role, and obviously you're a sales engineer manager, and I saw that you would launch the podcast, so that intrigued me a little bit. What I'd like to start with is just sort of your, relatively brief sort of career path to where you are now. How did you get into sales engineering? And then how did you end up sort of moving into that management position?
Yeah, for sure. It's a funny story. It's an interesting story. I don't know if it's funny, but I guess my career path started my first year out of Washington State University. I went from kind of a little bit more of a technical background in terms of internships that I had in college. I was an information systems and finance major. And so I went from that world to wanting to get into sales. And so my first gig out of college was actually selling wine and spirits with Gallo Winery.
That's great.
And so I was slinging wine and spirits to grocery stores in Sacramento, California.
Wow.
And, Gallo, to their credit, has a wonderful sales program. And I learned a ton about myself and how much I enjoy the thrill of the sale. But I always had that itch to get back into the technical side of things. And so I had a friend, Julie, who works for HighSpot and still works for HighSpot. She was very early on. And she convinced me to come up and interview with HighSpot for a SDR role. At HighSpot, we call them account development representatives, slightly different strategy. But that was kind of my first tech software sales job. And it's, everybody knows what SDRs do. It's cold calling and it's generating leads. And I did that for about a year. And I didn't even know what a sales engineer was until we hired our first sales engineer, who's our director and is now my boss. And I got to know him really well. His name's Matt Bahanen. And he's a fantastic sales engineer and a great director of our team. And so we just made a personal and professional relationship at HighSpot. And when the time came where they needed to scale out that team, I was his first hire on the sales engineering team.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting, just to repeat some of what you said. First of all, the fact that you were an IT and finance major, and you got out of school with a desire to get into sales. I mean, frankly, that makes you a little bit unique, I think. Just that alone. What was it about sales that sort of drew you to that profession? Because I don't think there's too many IT finance majors leaving school thinking, I want to get into sales.
Yeah, well, it's IIS, so information systems.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it's a little bit more. It's basically the technical side of the business school at Washington State.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, you're right. So I think for one, it was a lot easier to get a job in sales than in anything else. Honestly, there's a lot more jobs out there.
Yeah.
But for two, I just love interacting with people, and I had an internship after my junior year at school where I was doing database administration work for Farmers Insurance.
Yeah.
And so I was writing in SQL all day. And as much as I do enjoy coding, and I'm not as sharp on it as I once was, but I realized that that's not what I want to do all day, every day. I want to interact with people.
Yeah.
And I've also just always been kind of entrepreneurial. I had, a business in high school with my friend doing landscaping, and I actually had my first business. My dad loves this story. My first business ever was in third grade. I would go around to all of my neighbors and take orders for fresh berries. And then I would go out to the U-Pick berry farm. My dad would take me out there, and I would pick all the berries and fulfill the orders and ride around my bike and drop them off and make money. And my dad, let me keep all the money that I made from that.
That's great. That's great.
So I guess I've always been entrepreneurial. And I think my point there is that, in my opinion, sales is kind of entrepreneurial, right?
For sure.
You're building your own business. You're responsible for your own success. So that part of it just always attracted me as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was third grade. You were hawking berries.
Yeah.
I love it. And then your first job out of school is selling wine. And you said that's where you really found sort of a passion for sort of the thrill of the deal and engaging with people. Is there one thing in particular that sort of really stuck with you or sticks with you from your time at Gallo?
Yeah, to be honest, it's what I learned the most, I think, from Gallo was when times are tough as a sales rep and you have the pressure of your quota hanging over you and you're not doing well, it sucks. And you have to learn to deal with that. You have to learn to care enough about hitting your quota, and but you can't let it just destroy you, emotionally. Because my first couple months at Gallo, to be honest, I didn't know if I was doing good or bad. I didn't really have a good baseline of, is this where I should be? I want to be doing better. I'm really competitive. I've played sports my whole life. And so I wanted to be at the top of every leaderboard, and I wasn't. And so just learning how to deal with defeat or kind of like temporary failure was, I think, what I learned most about that. But on the flip side, I think turning into a top contributor for Gallo was what got me hooked, because once I got to the top of those leaderboards, I was like, oh, I really like this.
Yeah. Well, and did you also sort of do, was it also a process of realizing that you could do it, right? One of the things that I mentioned my sons. I mean, one of the things that I told tell my sons when they were growing up is, in order to do anything new, you have to be willing to be bad before you can be good, right? Like, just because you do, when you start something, unless you're a naturally gifted fill in the blank, right? You're not going to be very good at first, like you have to, you have to learn. So I think that's for you to have that sort of insight and self-awareness at such a young age is really a testimony to yourself and, presumably your parents, who I think may be listening. So incidentally, if we do have anybody on LinkedIn with us live, you're welcome to share a comment and say hello. If you have any questions for Luke or myself, we'll be happy to address those. Otherwise, we'll keep going. So you're at Gallo. You became an SDR. What about being an SDR did you like, and what about being an SDR, or was there anything about being an SDR that you liked, and what did you find to be the most difficult? I think it's one of the most difficult roles, frankly, in certainly in software, if not in sales. What was your experience like?
Yeah, there were certainly things that I really liked about being an SDR, and there were certainly things that I didn't like. I think that at HighSpot, I was in a very unique situation at that time for a lot of reasons. One, when I joined, we had about 50 employees, and in the course of the next 2 years, I think we grew to 300, and then the year after that, now we're at almost 600.
It's amazing.
Almost 5 years in. So,
yeah,
what I liked about it was that I had a extremely tight-knit group of individuals that I'm still really good friends with today. Almost everyone in my hiring class still works at HighSpot, and we've all moved on essentially to other areas of the business. HighSpot's really great about promoting internally.
Yeah.
And I'm still such good friends with them. But in those early days, we just had so much fun together on the sales floor, hanging out. Yeah. And you're on the phone and you totally botch a voicemail, or you just flub over your words, or somebody tells you to, get out of here and hangs up on you. I'm not going to use the language that they may use. But if you can turn to your buddy and just be like, oh my gosh, that guy was such a jerk or whatever, and just laugh about it.
Yes.
That's what I loved, was that camaraderie. And then just like I talked about at Gallo, getting the numbers, being a high performer and is super exciting in whatever role you are. So I loved the thrill of qualifying a lead. And for me, I also really found a lot of excitement in following my leads through the sales process. And I took a lot of pride in setting up really good quality leads and then seeing those come to fruition in ultimately close one revenue for the business, and feeling like I was a big part of that.
Yeah.
And then also the last thing that I really loved about my specific time as a SDR at HighSpot was that our leadership at HighSpot is so personable and so willing to talk with anyone and meet with anyone, grab coffee with anyone, no matter if you're an SDR or another VP, that I was able to network with so many cool, awesome people that have now become, close work colleagues, and they're so much more experienced than I am, and they passed me so many great nuggets of knowledge.
Yeah. No, it's all, and it's interesting to hear you talk about that camaraderie. I would say my favorite sales job was when I first became a sales engineer. It was very similar. We were all in an office together, and I had about 4 or 5 sales engineer colleagues, and the 4 or 5 of us supported a team of about, 15 to 20 sales reps, and it was just a tight knit group, right? And it felt like we were sort of going to war together, and we'd have good days and bad days, and good meetings and bad meetings, and we sort of celebrated one another's successes, and we sort of commiserated with one another with some of the failures, and that's an awesome experience. Now, how has COVID changed all that? I assume everybody's working from home now. Are there certain things that you guys are doing to still try to keep that feeling of camaraderie a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, personally with my team, I've made a big effort to have bonding events, and whether it be remote or depending on kind of where things are at in Washington, we've done a couple where we've gotten together outdoors, masks on, being safe.
Very cool.
But still just able to be close to each other. Like we went kayaking on Lake Union last summer.
Wow.
And HighSpot again is super supportive of making sure that we have the budget to go do those things as long as it's done in a safe way.
Right.
But it's been really hard. I mean, that's one of the things that makes HighSpot, in my mind, so special, is the events that we get to go do together, and that's how you build camaraderie in a lot of ways. And not even special events, just being there next to each other and dealing with those issues. So I guess I do more frequent one-on-ones with my team and more what we call pause and plays, where, and this isn't a new concept by any means, but just listen to gong recordings of my team and pause and talk about like what we could be doing, things that I would probably be, if we were in the office, just hearing them on the phones and saying, hey, I noticed you said that. And so trying to do more of that, but it's definitely been a huge impact.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think so many of us just miss that interaction, and just miss being together. Right. So I think that's great that you guys can do some of that anyways. Talk to me a little bit about sort of the transition to being a sales engineer. So here you are, BDR, you're part of the team, you're tracing these deals through to completion. And now here you are in an SE role. I assume you're giving demonstrations. What was that transition like for you?
Yeah, it was extremely exciting and extremely nerve-wracking. I was so pumped about the job. I mean, I just knew it was going to be awesome, but I was very, very nervous because up till that point, the sales engineers that had been demoing on deals where either the AE would just do the demo themselves, but if they needed to bring in the big guns, they would bring in our director, Matt B, our CEO, or one of our principal solution architects.
Wow.
And I was the first just pure kind of sales engineer, I guess.
Right.
And so, they did their best to start me small and start with, small, not as important demos, but it's only a matter of time until they're like, everyone else is booked, Luke, and we have this meeting with, this enterprise company. So I guess good luck. So before I knew it, I was getting kind of thrown into those opportunities. But I realized that by taking away a little bit of a safety net and being forced into the deep end, you have no choice but to learn very fast.
Yeah.
And so I learned quickly. I made a lot of mistakes, but the first 6 months was just all about learning and working kind of SMB and commercial. And then since we grew so fast, I was quickly able to get comfortable in the enterprise and strategic space and kind of settle in and have a lot of great experiences there.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you sort of, were thrown into the deep end. What were some of the things that surprised you the most about the role once you really started to sort of get your, sea legs about you, so to speak?
Yeah, I think what surprised me about the role,
either good or bad.
Yeah, the relationships that you build with your account executives are just so crucial. And my biggest fear going into it was that the account executives wouldn't trust me and wouldn't hand me over the reins. And it took longer with some than with others to gain that trust. But once I did, I felt, again, that sense of camaraderie, like we're really in this together. And I think from the outside looking in, the sales engineering role, it's our job to do a feature dump demo, as you know, we call it in sales engineering, the feature dump, right? Like just here's every feature we have, and they're all so cool, and check this out. But I realized very quickly that it's our job to really understand the pains of the customer in the same way that our AE does, so that we can be the strategic partner with the account executive and drive home the value behind every feature. So I think my first 6 months, I was really just focused on, I just need to know the product like the back of my hand and just talk about how cool the product is and all the things the product can do. But then after a while, I was like, oh, wait, I need to be talking about why it's cool that we can do this.
Exactly.
I think that surprised me.
Well, and it's so interesting, Luke. Incidentally, I'm assuming Spencer is one of your buddies. He's giving you sort of the high five there. Glad you're with us, Spencer. It honestly, it reminds me a little bit of my journey, and I don't recall if you've read my book or not, but there's a reason habit one is to partner with your sales counterpart. And, as I like to say, sales is a team sport, right? And that's, that was sort of the first aha moment for me was, as a sales engineer, I'm actually in sales, right? My primary role is no longer the smart technical person, right? My primary role is sales first, right? Now I'm responsible for the technical side of the sale, right? But then the second habit is to probe, right? It's all around discovery. And to your point, I learned very quickly that it wasn't good enough for me to just go in and be the smartest guy in the room, right? Yeah. And so I had to do some discovery of my own and some homework. And I love the way you said it. We have to understand the customer's objectives, right, and what they're trying to accomplish, really, as well as our AEs, right, our sales counterparts. So
yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and I think kind of going off of that, as a sales engineer, you actually become this trusted advisor, not only to the AE but to the customer. The customer sees you not as a salesman trying to, if you do your job right, I think the customer doesn't see you as someone who's trying to sell them something. You're just the guy in the room who has all the answers and is going to steer them in the right way. And that is so crucial. And it's easy to lose that relationship because you steer too far towards, oversharing or stepping over boundaries. But I quickly realized how much the customers trusted me and, would ask sometimes a sales engineer specifically a question because they're like, oh, he's going to, shoot me straight here, which
exactly.
Yeah.
It's an unfair advantage. First of all, it's unfair to our sales counterparts. And by the way, as sales engineers, it's something for us to keep in mind that our sales counterparts, they're sort of, assumed and, proven guilty, or they're assumed guilty until proven innocent, so to speak, right? Yeah. They are not extended the benefit of the doubt. Whereas we as sales engineers are, right? Now we can't use that or take advantage of that per se, but we are a little bit of the secret weapon in that regard, in the sales process. So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Now, as you sort of, evolve through your position there, right? The way I understand it, at some point you got the tap on the shoulder and the opportunity just to move into a management position was offered. Mm-hmm. Did you hesitate at all? Were you a little bit uncertain, or were you just instantly like, sign me up, I'm in?
I hesitated for sure. For a couple of different reasons. I think, for one, I was afraid that moving into a manager role would cause me to lose the sharp edge of my sword as a demoer. I felt like I was really hitting my stride, in a lot of ways, and up-leveling my game as a sales engineer. And I didn't want to lose that opportunity, so I made it very clear, and we agreed with my management, if I move into this role, I still want to have some involvement in some deals, whether that's picking and choosing a few specifically or working with one or two AEs.
Yeah.
And I was bummed. I had to give up my favorite AEs that I've been working with forever. And that's always a bummer. But and then I think for two, I honestly, we talked a little bit last time we spoke. We talked a little bit about imposter syndrome, and I was just like, do you really think I have enough to teach these people? I mean, I've been a sales engineer for, I guess, almost 2 years at that time.
Right.
And so I just, I wanted to be respected by my team, and I didn't want to have a difficult relationship going from peer to manager, and I wanted to be very cognizant of that transition.
Yeah. And how did the transition go?
I think it went pretty well. I mean, you'd have to ask the people on my team, but I think I am lucky that the 5 people that I manage are all just go-getters. They're extremely intelligent. They're patient with me, and they give me really open and honest feedback. And that's one thing that I harp on from the get-go. The first time I meet with any of my direct reports is, I need you to just be brutally honest with me, and it's never going to hurt my feelings, and let's just have that open and honest relationship. And that's helped a lot. But there's been moments of struggle, and there's days where I miss just not having to worry about manager stuff and just be able to dive into my deals. But overall, I've grown a lot, I think, from it.
Yeah. And what have you found to be sort of some of the biggest either struggles or challenges in moving into that management role?
Mm-hmm. It's not about the success that you find isn't because of things that you do anymore. You get success as a manager from the things that your directors do.
Yep.
And so letting go of the reins and letting them go, run free, but give them the tools to do it.
Yeah.
Has been a struggle. And time management has absolutely been the biggest struggle. I mean, since I do still have some deals that I'm a part of and the lead sales engineer on, it's very difficult to prioritize how much time do I spend coaching my new reps and up-leveling my more tenured reps, and how much time do I spend prepping for this demo or filling out this RFP.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I actually did a talk yesterday with Matt Darrow from Vivint. And one of the things that we talked about is precisely what you just, mentioned, which is when we go from really a superstar SE individual contributor to a manager role, we have to completely shift our mindset, right? And our success is no longer our success, right? Our success is now our team's success, right? And we really have to develop, and what I work with a company called Aslan Training and Development, and they refer to as an other-centered, position, right? An other-centered approach, right? Meaning, it's as opposed to a self-centered approach. And it really sounds like that's the transition that you've gone through. Now, have you gotten to the point where the feeling of imposter syndrome is shrinking at least a little bit for you?
I think it's shrinking, but I've actually come to the conclusion that just never goes away. And especially from, interviewing people with my podcast and whatnot, I think I realized that if you have no imposter syndrome, then you're probably just not pushing yourself hard enough. If you're 100% confident in that you don't need to get better at what you're doing, which I think is kind of what imposter syndrome is really all about. Yeah. Then you should push yourself a little bit harder. So I definitely still have imposter syndrome, but it evolves over time to be worried about different things, because I get better at those things that I was worried about a year ago. But no, I mean, just in terms of my role as a manager, I feel like I have my legs underneath me. I feel like I'm making improvements to my team and making them better, and they're making me better. So it's definitely gotten better. Yeah. And, and when we talked about, a few weeks ago, we talked about it, and you mentioned that concept about the imposter syndrome. I have to admit, I hear truth in that as well. Even all the things that I'm doing, it's hard to, even doing something like this, it's hard to just put yourself out there, right? Because there's always going to be, fans and critics. And you just sort of have to balance. But I do agree, if we become too comfortable in whatever we're doing, that may be an indication that we're not sort of pushing ourselves enough, right? And so particularly if you have a drive inside of you, to always be sort of expanding and growing, then I think a little bit of that imposter syndrome, a little bit of that regular discomfort's maybe not such a bad thing. So now you mentioned the podcast, which is a perfect segue, because I wanted to ask you about the podcast. Talk about growth and extension. I've got to believe that was a bit of a leap of faith on your part as well. Yeah, the podcast is it's really just something that I thought would be interesting and also a challenge for myself, because I don't think of myself as someone who's naturally boisterous or an interviewer type, I guess. And it's not any type of thing that I've done before. So that's sort of why I wanted to try it. So the podcast is called 20s and Broke. Yeah. And essentially the idea behind the podcast is, I feel as though when you are in your 20s, so you're in this early stage of adulthood, there are a lot of voices going in different directions. One person tells you that you need to get the right job and start maxing out your 401k right now, and retirement savings starts now, and go buy a house and this and that. And then there's another person equally probably as intelligent telling you you're not going to care if you worked in 20 years. You should quit your job and go move to Bali and buy a van and, just do whatever. And the juxtaposition between those two voices is something that I worry a lot about. Am I doing the right things? Am I having enough fun? And so the podcast is really all about just hearing people's stories, whether they're doing the traditional, like what society tells you is the right thing to do, or just doing something totally non-traditional and crazy, and understanding what they're getting out of that experience to hopefully help people just feel confident in following whatever calls to them, whatever their passion is. If your passion is to go work for a consulting company and work, 70, 80 hours a week and go make partner, awesome, go do that. But like, if that's not your passion, then you should be doing something else.
Yeah. Well, and it's just so love those words. And one of the things that I tell my sons on the regular is whatever decision you make, know why, right? Know your why, because regardless of what decision you make, you're going to find yourself second guessing yourself at times, right? And you need that foundation to fall back on, right? You need that the sort of the foundation of, this is why I made the decision. I made the best decision I could based on the information I had, right? And I'm that's sort of the stability, so to speak, that sort of keeps you through those moments of second guessing yourself. Now, what are some of the things that you have learned from some of the guests that you've had on, or some of the new insights that you've gained as a result?
Yeah, I think one thing that stands out to me is there is no right time to do anything. And one of the reasons I started the podcast was because I'm just a worrier. I am just somebody who just thinks about things for so long, and I get analysis paralysis. I'm just, what are my options? What are my options? And if I do this, what bad could happen? And weighing the cost benefit analysis there. But at the end of the day, just do something, and you can always do something else later.
Exactly.
Like, whatever choice you make, it's probably not the last opportunity you're going to have to do something. So I would say that's been one of the biggest key takeaways. Is everyone I've interviewed has said they've struggled with whatever they're going to do. Like, is this the right time to do it? And they always say, in retrospect, this and this and this went wrong, but I learned so much from that it was just as good of a time as any.
Exactly. No, I think that's a really good lesson, for people your age to learn, which is with some exceptions, and there are some exceptions, but with few exceptions, most decisions are not permanent, right? And I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to make the best decision, right? And my attitude is, let's just make a better decision. Right? Let's think it through and make as good a decision as we can make, given the information that we have right now, right? Knowing that at some point, it really, in many cases, at any point, we can make a better decision once we are further down the road, right? And by the way, sometimes no decision is the right decision, right? Sometimes you just don't have, enough information to make a better decision. And so sometimes staying the course is the right way to go. So I just think that's so as you've sort of, gone through that, have there been any sort of key aha moments for you that have even, encouraged you to sort of shift your trajectory at all as you've had these various podcasts?
Yeah, I think my first episode is with my friend Sam, and he's a football coach. He's a high school football coach, and he talks about this book called "Make the Big Time Where You Are" by Frosty Westring, I think is the author's name. And so I ended up reading it, and what it's all about is just not being content with where you are. Like, it's not that you don't want to move up or move forward, but you have to be happy where you are, and you have to be present where you are. And so for me, I think I have spent so much time thinking about like, what's the next thing? What's the next promotion? You know, when am I going to be able to do this? I want to go do this. And also imagining in my head at every point, the next thing is where I'll be happy or content. You know, you chase more money and you think about, oh, if I get that 10% raise that I really want, that 10% extra money is going to just make me so much happier. And that's going to be all I need. But the reality is you get there and you just want the next thing.
Totally.
And so I've been trying to work a lot more on just being present and being happy and really caring about what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
But also being future minded and setting, goals for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, those are very wise words from a young man. I really value what you're saying, and there's so much truth to it. If you can't be happy where you are, you're probably not going to be happy, quote, somewhere else, right? Whether it's a different place, a different job, more money, et cetera. And I can speak from personal experience. I mean, that was sort of my story. I was so this is probably the early 2000s. So I'm in my early 30s. I was making very good money as a consultant, but I was miserable. And I was sort of job hopping because I would land on a project as a consultant, and I loved it for the first month or two, and then after a month or two, I just got bored and I was ready to move on to the next. And I went through a career counseling program to sort of, because I thought there was something wrong with me, frankly. I was like, what's the matter with me? I'm making more money than I thought I'd ever make, and I had a family and I had kids, but I was miserable. And what I discovered when I went through this process is that there wasn't anything wrong with me at all. I just had a number of skills and talents that needed an outlet, right? And if I didn't have an outlet for, frankly, doing stuff like this, talking and speaking and presenting, right? It was like a caged tiger, right? Pacing back and forth. So no, I think there's so much truth in that. So, and incidentally, you mentioned football coach. If I could have done, in fact, when I got out of college, I actually went back to my high school and I coached the freshman and JV team for like 3 years. And I absolutely loved it. And then my sons played high school football and I was involved in all that. And if I could have done something completely different, high school football coach was not entirely off the radar. So, but here's the irony is that when I look at you and your position, if I had to get back into the field as a sales engineer or a sales engineer leader, I probably might want your job. I would love to work for a sales enablement company. And because I think being a sales engineer or being in sales with a sales enablement company is so interesting because you're basically selling a product that you yourself use for starters. Yeah. You're selling to people like you who are in the same profession, right? And I just think it's so talk to me a little bit about that experience for you. How has it been being a sales engineer, working for sales enablement, like basically pitching to salespeople?
It's awesome. And I think about that actually all the time because I, of course, think about, down the line, do I want to stay in sales engineering? Is this something that's a passion of mine? And I think it is, but I think about how much different would it be if I were selling software to, marketers or IT people or people that I've never been in their shoes. I think sometimes I took it for granted at the beginning of my career with HighSpot that I get to use my software that I sell every day. So I know it. I know why it's important. I know how sellers use it. And so it's extremely helpful. And I guess for those maybe listening who aren't super familiar with HighSpot or with sales enablement, essentially what our software does at its core is help improve the efficiency of your customer-facing team members. We do that by offering a single source of truth for all the training, content, guidance, collateral that you might use throughout your day, and putting a a level of artificial intelligence and recommendations on top of that to bring the right thing to you in the flow of your work. And so it just aligns so well with how we work as sellers. So I guess to answer your question, it's all I have ever known as a sales engineer, but I feel like it really makes my job a lot easier.
There's I mean, by the way, there's no doubt. Incidentally, I just have to, Sam Belcastro, I don't know if you know Sam, he's one of the founders of the National Society of Sales Engineers. But he shared a comment. Sam, it's good to see you. I'll always love having you on our sessions. No, you're so right. And incidentally, Luke, I mean, one of the things, when I have people on the regular reach out to me and say, I'm thinking about trying to break into sales engineering. What recommendation do you have for me? And the first thing I say is, what are you an expert in? Right? Like what do you know? What is your background? Right? Who can you speak to and engage with and connect with just naturally, and quote natively, right? If you have a background in sales enablement, or the sales tech space would be a great place. There's a gentleman that I've been talking with, and he has a background in the mental health industry. Like, I would be talking to, there must be software vendors that sell to that market, right? You're an expert and you know how to communicate to them, right? So I do think that's the perfect role for you. And it's interesting that it probably is something that you sort of figured out after the fact, right? One of the things I love to say is fish discover water last, right? Because they don't know not water.
Yeah.
So for you, it was sort of like an aha moment. Now, I have a perception about the sales enablement space, which I think makes your role particularly interesting. And my perception or my belief is that the sales enablement space has actually sort of underserved the sales engineer role for years. What do you think about that? Do you agree with that observation?
I do. Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I don't necessarily think it's anything deliberate. I just think that really it started with, account executives are kind of the front line in the most traditional sense of they are a sales rep at most software companies. Yep. And it has filtered its way into SDR orgs and, account management and services. And in HighSpot, our software is really designed for any customer facing team. We don't we don't just pinpoint towards account executives. Right. But more and more, I've been having meetings with sales engineering teams, and it's been fantastic. I've in networking groups, I'm a part of like the pre-sales collective. I've met sales engineering leaders at our customers who have asked me to come in and do sessions with them on how sales engineers at HighSpot use HighSpot.
Interesting.
And that's been pretty enlightening for me. So, again, another reason that it's nice to work at a sales enablement company in sales is that you get really good sales enablement. And so, like our sales enablement, I feel like this is Inception or something, but our sales enablement team is world-class, and they provide us with all of the plays and the guidance that we need to do our job really well. It's all using HighSpot. I mean, it's almost like an unfair advantage. I mean, you guys are, you're using your platform to do what you do, right? Sort of best in class, so to speak. Exactly. But the sales engineering space is, in terms of technology for sales engineers, there's just not a ton of it out there. And you mentioned Vivin. I'm kind of getting familiar with Vivin right now, and they seem like a great tool. But I couldn't tell you too many other players in the sales engineering technology space. So
it's a space that's growing, and certainly I can name probably a dozen or so, but almost all of them have sort of surfaced in the past year or two. So it's a market that's now just starting to open up. So anyway, Luke, I want to be respectful of your time and anybody who might be listening to us. We're about 50 minutes in, so we're gonna land, as I like to say, the landing gear is out and the runway is in sight. So we're gonna land this plane pretty quickly. You've been such a gracious guest, and your poise and just your sort of thoughtful approach, honestly, is years beyond your actual age. And I really, really appreciate you joining. Now, I do have 3 questions that I like to ask my guests at the end of a session, in somewhat, rapid, fire, that they don't necessarily see coming. So my first of the 3 questions is I'm going to invite you to think back to a demonstration that you gave that didn't go particularly well. And share, if you will, that story and why did it not go particularly well?
Yeah, well, it was all the AE's fault.
That I have never heard anybody say that, and that is an absolutely priceless response.
No, it was my fault. I'm trying to get one in particular in mind because certainly a lot have gone wrong. But the one that I'm thinking of, I was just not technically prepared for the audience that I was facing. The audience I was facing, I could have done more research to understand their technical prowess. And at the time of my career, I just was not able to go toe to toe with them. And on the same token, I think I also couldn't land with them the value of what our product was portraying, so that all they cared about was the technical part, which I couldn't really get them the answers that they wanted. So I think the lesson there is that I needed to do more research into the people I was going to be talking to, so that I had in my arsenal the value propositions that they would care about.
Yeah. And when you say the technical part, I guess my assumption there is sort of like their level of what I might call sales enablement IQ, or their sales enablement maturity was a certain level. And so that they had a pretty specific expectation of certain capabilities that you weren't able to adequately present and describe. Is that sort of a fair interpretation of that?
I think that is a fair interpretation, and just their own technical prowess, like not even sales enablement related, but just software related, I was not prepared for.
Yeah. No, that's well, and also the inability to communicate the value. I think sometimes we just sort of play over our head, so to speak, right? So incidentally, you're getting some love from Nick Matson. So we'll do a shout out to Nick. Thanks for tuning in. So the second question is, we're going to reverse the table. When's the last time, or think of a time that you were on the receiving end of a demonstration, or maybe witness to a demonstration that was particularly effective and particularly engaging? And if you can think of one, what about that particular demonstration made it so effective and so engaging?
Well, the first thing is the demonstrations that I hear most often are my own team giving demonstrations. I listen to them all the time, and everyone on my team is extremely talented, and I love to see how fast they improve because they're all young sales engineers. But the one in particular that comes to mind, I guess, is I think what they did really well was throughout the entire demonstration, they tied one unified story. They contextualized the demonstration into a story that resonated extremely strongly with their audience, which I know is like sales engineering 101, but just the way they did this, like, I mean, what I mean by that is not that it's easy to do, but just that it's like the thing we talk about as sales engineers probably the most is you got to tell a story.
Right.
But the way they were able to frame it up from the beginning and then follow that same thread the whole way through the demonstration and continuously check in with the customer and have the customer check in with them and just be in the same lens, the same purview, understanding the software and the value behind it was just really impressive. And I think that's a good demo, no matter what you're demoing.
Yeah. Well, and you're so right about that. I mean, look, is telling a good story, sales engineering 101. Yes, it is, but it's also 505, right? I mean, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. Yeah. And weaving the story throughout and keeping your prospect engaged and making it a conversation. The best demonstrations are conversations, right? And one of the disruptive truths that I like to share is, particularly in the virtual world, even when we're giving the demonstration, we should get our customers talking more than us, right?
Yeah.
Like they should actually, if they're doing more talking than me, that's usually success. So I love it. All right. So in our final moments here, third and final question in this quote lightning round, if you could ask me one question, what might it be?
Wow, that's a good one. If you could go back and change the trajectory of your life at some point in your 20s, you could think about you know, Chris, as a 20-something-year-old. Would you, or is there something that comes to mind as something you wish you had done when you were my age that you didn't?
Wow, that is a really good question. And let me first start by saying that if there's anything I've learned, so I'll be 53 in a month. I'll be 53 next month. And I just launched Demo Doctor, about a year ago, and it's something that I think was inside of me for 30 years or certainly 20 years. But as I look back on certainly my career and my adult life, I realized that even though it seems at times that it took me too long to sort of get here, I also realized that every step along the way was an important one, right? And I learned something important along the way. That being said, if I could have changed anything, I would have told myself, don't let fear be the reason you make a decision. Don't let fear be the reason you don't do something or slow down. And one of the things that I sort of do on the side is I'm a real estate investor, and I dabbled in real estate investing in my mid-20s, and then I sort of got scared, and I had one property and I bailed. I saw it. I was like, this is, and then that one property I think sold a year later for like 100,000 more than I had sold it to that. And it was about 10 years that I was, I just sort of had cold feet and I was scared. And then I jumped back into the game. So had I, quote, stayed in the game for that 10 years, I would have probably I'd probably be in a different, financial position now. But, that being said, if there's anything I've learned, every step, both, quote, good and bad, is an important step in the journey, and I really don't regret anything. And I've made a lot of dumb mistakes and big moves, but that I think that's the biggest lesson. So anyway, fantastic question. And I know that last question always throws people for a little bit of a curveball, but I'm always interested to hear what people bring back to me. So by the way, Devin Daniels, I guess is another friend, giving you some love as well. So hey, Luke, I just want to thank you so much. Like I said, I mean, you're thoughtful, you're mature beyond your years. I can see that you're headed to great things in your career and life. Any closing thoughts as we sort of wrap up for today?
I think after the answer to that question, I might have to have you on the podcast, because that's kind of the gist of what I'm trying to get to with the podcast. So no, I think it's been a pleasure talking to you. And if again, the 20s and Broke is the name of the podcast, so be sure to check it out. We're on Twitter, and you can just check my LinkedIn. And if you're interested in learning anything more about sales enablement or sales engineering from my point of view, or the podcast or anything, just reach out to me on LinkedIn and let's connect.
Super. Awesome. Well, Luke, you have given the 20-somethings a good name and a good showing in this podcast. So
thank you.
I'm sure, and Bryce, I'll assume maybe another friend or colleague is giving you some love as well. Thank you so much, Luke, and any of you who either joined us live or may have picked us up in the recording. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll be live tomorrow with another guest, and certainly once a week. So, Luke, thanks so much. Take care.
Yeah, it's been really fun. Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.